Aloha Commanders, and welcome to Later Tonight with Dr. Iron Chef, hosted on Aloha Diz.
Please be sure to follow on Twitch and subscribe on YouTube for all the latest content.
Today we discuss the new blog post from Star Trek Suite Command. Section 31 Officers, Apex Shred Specialists.
What's really interesting about this is that Star Trek Fleet Command has had these super tough shields, called Apex barriers, but now they've introduced this new mechanic, Apex Shred, and these new Section 31 officers are the key to using it.
Okay, so let's break this down for our listeners who might not be familiar with Apex barriers. You encounter them in a lot of places, but they're a particularly big deal in the new Solo Wave defense mode.
Yeah.
It's like running into a brick wall with your ships.
Yeah.
But Apex Shred lets you chip away at that wall.
Exactly. Imagine you're facing a wave of enemy ships, and they all have these Apex barriers up. Before, it was all about brute force trying to punch through with sheer firepower. But now with Apex Shred, you can weaken those barriers first, making your attacks so much more effective.
So it's not just about having the biggest guns anymore. It's about using strategy to exploit this new mechanic, and that's where these Section 31 officers come in.
Precisely. We've got 3 new officers, Georgia, Rachel Garrett, and Zeph. Each one has a unique way of applying Apex Shred and shaking up the strategic landscape.
And you know me, I always love a good wild card. So let's start with Zeph. The blog post calls him a chaos agent, and I've got to know more.
He's definitely the most unpredictable of the bunch on the bridge. Zeph can apply a random combat state to enemy ships. Each round, it could be anything. Weakened shields, reduced attack power, you name it. It's like rolling the dice and hoping for some lucky debuffs on your opponent.
So while GD and Rachel Garrett have their specialties, Zeph is more about keeping your opponent guessing.
That's a great way to put it. You might get lucky and completely cripple an enemy flagship, but relying on randomness isn't always the most sound strategy. He's high risk, high reward.
Interesting. So Zeph is the one you bring in when you're feeling lucky, or maybe when you're up against a really tough opponent and need to pull out all the stops. Yeah.
Exactly. You might get lucky and completely cripple an enemy flagship right before it can use its ultimate ability. Talk about a clutch moment.
That would be amazing. Okay, so we've got our Chaos Agent, Zeph. Now let's talk about the Queen herself, Gigi, what makes her so special.
Georgie, or Gigi as she's affectionately known, is amazing on the bridge against any enemy that's not part of your armada. She just shreds through their Apex barriers. This makes her a versatile choice for those long campaign missions where you face a mix of Romulans, Klingons, and who knows what else.
So she's your go-to for weakening enemy defenses across the board, especially when you're not facing those mirror universe baddies.
You got it, but wait, there's more. Her below-deck abilities where she really shines in PvP combat. She weakens the enemy commander's defenses, making your boarding parties way more effective. It's like she's undermining their leadership from within.
Okay, that's devious.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just about brute force with Gigi. It's about weakening your opponent on multiple levels. Very strategic, very Section 31.
Exactly. And when you combine her abilities with the other Section 31 officers, you start to see some truly devastating combos emerge. The synergy is really remarkable.
Synergy, my favorite word. This is where things start to get really interesting. So we've got our wild card, we've got our queen. Now let's talk about our final Section 31 officer, Rachel Garrett.
Rachel Garrett is the battleship buster. She is specifically designed to counter those big, tough battleships that rely on Apex barriers, while Gigi is great against a variety of enemies. Rachel Garrett is laser-focused on taking down those capital ships.
So if I'm understanding correctly, she's not just good against any battleship. He's specifically designed to counter those relying on Apex barriers.
Precisely, and what makes her even more dangerous is that her below-deck ability enhances Gigi's Apex Shred against battleships. You put those two together, and it's pretty much game over for any battleship trying to hide behind those barriers. If you're talking about a massive force multiplier.
I'm starting to see why they call her the battleship buster. That's a combo I'm definitely going to have to try out, but wait. The blog post mentioned something about her bridge ability boosting loot.
Right now, while taking down those battleships is satisfying, Rachel Garrett also brings a little something extra to the table if you put her on the bridge. She increases the loot you get from enemies, and get this. The article even suggests pairing her with Enterprise Epocard and 5 of 11 for maximum loot boost. Talk about a treasure hunting dream team.
So not only can she demolish those pesky battleships, but she can also help you fatten your coffers in the process. That's what I call adding insult to injury. You destroy their ships and walk away with their loot.
You got it. Rachel Garrett is a real Swiss Army knife, deadly and profitable.
Okay, this is fantastic.
Okay.
We've got Zeph, the Chaos Agent, Gigi, the Apex Shred Queen, and Rachel Garrett, the Battleship Buster with a knack for looting. That's quite the team. But I'm curious, are these Section 31 officers only good for solo wave defense where Apex barriers are super common, or can they be valuable elsewhere?
That's a great question. And You know what? The article actually hints that their usefulness extends beyond solo wave defense. It specifically mentions and beyond, which is pretty intriguing, right?
Ooh, that and beyond comment really piques my curiosity. Based on what we know about Section 31, what are some plausible scenarios where these officers could become even more valuable?
Well, think about it. Apex barriers are showing up more and more throughout the game. We're seeing them in tougher campaign missions and certain events. Heck, even some savvy players are starting to use them in PvP. So anywhere you encounter those barriers, these Section 31 officers have the potential to shine.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about one game mode. It's about adapting to the evolving challenges of Star Trek Fleet Command and having the right tools for the job.
Exactly. The developers are always adding new content and new challenges. It's what keeps the game fresh and exciting. And it seems like they've designed these Section 31 officers to be adaptable to those future challenges. They're like a strategic investment, a way to future-proof your fleet.
I love that way of thinking about it. So you're saying that even if you're not a huge fan of solo wave defense, these officers are still worth considering because they have the potential to be valuable in other areas of the game.
Absolutely. They add a whole new dimension to the game, and I think savvy players will find creative ways to utilize their unique abilities.
This is all so exciting. Can't wait to dive in and start experimenting with these officers myself. But before we get too carried away, there's one more thing I want to touch on.
I'm all ears. What's on your mind?
Well, we've talked a lot about the tactical side of things. Apex shreds synergies, countering battleships. But these are Section 31 officers, right?
Yeah.
And Section 31 is all about operating in the shadows, doing the dirty work that Starfleet can't or won't do.
Mhm.
So what does it mean that they're now openly deploying officers with these game-changing abilities? Does it suggest that the stakes are getting higher in the Star Trek Fleet Command universe?
Oh, you've hit on a really fascinating point. I mean, think about it. Why would Section 31, an organization known for its secrecy, suddenly reveal these powerful officers and tactics? It definitely raises some questions about the current state of the galaxy and Star Trek Fleet Command. Are things getting so desperate that they're being forced to come out of the shadows, or are they becoming more brazen, more willing to exert their influence openly? It's a great question to ponder. You know, thinking about these officers, I'm struck by how their introduction really shakes up the strategic landscape of Star Trek Fleet Command. It's like the developers have given us a whole new set of tools to play with.
I totally agree. We were just talking about how Apex barriers have become more and more common throughout the game, and these Section 31 officers are clearly designed to counter that trend. It's like they've anticipated this shift in the meta and give us a way to adapt.
Exactly. Before these officers, if you came up against a fleet loaded with Apex barriers, you pretty much had to brute force your way through. It was a real slog. But now with Apex Shred, we have a way to be more strategic, more surgical in our approach. We can target those barriers, directly weaken them, and make our attacks so much more effective.
It's almost like they've added a whole new layer of depth to combat. It's not just about raw firepower anymore. It's about understanding how to exploit these new mechanics to your advantage.
And that's what makes these Section 31 officers so intriguing. They're not just about raw power, they're about strategy. They force players to think differently about how they approach battles.
But it's funny, when I first heard about Apex Shred, I thought, oh, great, another power creep mechanic. But the more I think about it, the more I realize it's actually a really clever way to counter the prevalence of Apex barriers. It's like a balancing act. Right as defenses get stronger, the offense needs to adapt.
I see what you mean. It's a constant back and forth, a game of cat and mouse between offense and defense, and these Section 31 officers are the latest twist in that ongoing saga.
So it's not enough to just have these officers on your crew. You need to understand how to use them effectively. You need to know when to deploy them, who to pair them with, and how to maximize their impact.
Absolutely. It's all about synergy, understanding how their abilities complement each other, how to create those force multipliers that can really swing a battle in your favor. It's like a chess game. You need to think several moves ahead, anticipating your opponent's defenses and planning your attacks accordingly.
You know what? That's a great analogy. Chess is all about strategy positioning and knowing when to sacrifice a piece to gain a tactical advantage, and these Section 31 officers bring that same level of strategic thinking to Star Trek Fleet Command.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's not just about sending your ships in and hoping for the best. Now you have to consider the interplay between Apex barriers and the unique abilities of these officers. It's a whole new level of complexity.
Okay, I'm convinced these officers are more than just flashy new additions. They're game changers that have the potential to revolutionize the way we play Star Trek Fleet Command.
I completely agree. It's like a whole new era of the game is beginning an era defined by apex shred and strategic mastery. And I, for one, am excited to see how players adapt to this new landscape, what kind of creative strategies they come up with. I'm sure we'll see some truly innovative uses for these officers that we haven't even thought of.
It's funny. We've been talking about how these officers are designed to counter apex barriers,
Yeah.
but I think they could also lead to an increase in the use of apex barriers.
Mm.
I mean, if everyone's running around with apex shred, wouldn't it make sense to bolster your defenses with more apex barriers?
That's an interesting point. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The introduction of a countermeasure leads to an escalation in the very thing it was designed to counter. It'll be fascinating to see how that dynamic plays out in the coming weeks and months.
Be like an arms race, but with shields and shield-piercing technology instead of weapons, and the players are caught in the middle trying to figure out the best way to adapt and stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly, and that's what makes this game so engaging. It's constantly evolving, always throwing new challenges at us. Just when you think you've mastered the meta, something new comes along and shakes things up, and that's a good thing. It keeps things fresh, exciting, and unpredictable.
Okay, so we've established that these Section 31 officers are a big deal. They bring a new level of strategic depth to the game, and they have the potential to shake up the meta in some really interesting ways. But let's not forget that and beyond. Comment the blog post.
Ah, yes, the mystery deepens. It's like the developers are dangling a carrot in front of us, teasing us with the possibilities. And that's a smart move. It keeps the community buzzing, gets people speculating and theorizing. It builds anticipation for what's to come.
I have a feeling that and beyond is more than just a tease. I think it's a sign that the developers have big plans for these Section 31 officers. They're not just a one-off addition. They're the foundation for something bigger.
Yeah. I tend to agree it would be odd to introduce such a game-changing mechanic like Apex Shred and then limit its application to just a handful of scenarios. It feels like the beginning of something much larger. A new chapter in the Star Trek Fleet Command saga.
Ooh, a new chapter. I like the sound of that.
Okay.
Okay, let's put on our speculation hats for a minute. What are some of the possibilities that and beyond could be hinting at?
Well, we've already talked about the potential for new game modes or challenges specifically designed to test these Section 31 officers and their Apex Shred abilities. Imagine a mode where Apex barriers are even more prevalent, forcing players to rely heavily on these officers to succeed. Or maybe a mode focused on PvP boarding actions, where GG's ability to weaken enemy commanders would be incredibly valuable.
Those are great ideas. I could see those being really popular with players. But what about new enemies? What if the developers introduce enemies that are specifically designed to counter these Section 31 officers?
Ooh, that's a clever thought. Like enemies with super strong Apex barriers that are resistant to Apex Shred. Or maybe enemies that can disable Apex Shred abilities altogether. That would certainly keep things interesting and force players to adapt their strategies.
It would be like a constant arms race, with the developers introducing new challenges and the players finding creative ways to overcome them. That's what makes Star Trek Fleet Command so addictive. There's always something new to figure out, a new puzzle to solve.
It's like a mental workout, right? You're constantly having to think, critically analyze the situation and adapt your approach. And with these Section 31 officers, that mental workout just got a whole lot more intense.
I love it. Okay, I think we've sufficiently teased our listeners with speculation about the future, but for now, let's bring it back to the present and talk a little more about these officers and their abilities. There's a lot to unpack here, and I want to make sure we cover all the bases.
Sounds good to me. Where should we start?
Well, we've talked about GG's ability to apply Apex Shred against non-Armada enemies on the bridge. But what exactly does that mean in practice? Who are these non-Armada enemies? And why is it important to have an officer who specializes in taking them down?
That's a great question, and it speaks to the diversity of enemies you encounter in Star Trek Fleet Command. You've got your Romulans, your Klingons, your Augments, even some factions that haven't been fully explored in the Star Trek universe, and each of these factions has its own strengths and weaknesses.
So GG is like your all-purpose shield shredder. For those times when you're facing a mixed bag of enemies, like if you're on a campaign mission and you're not sure who you're going to encounter, you bring GG along just in case.
You got it. She's a versatile choice for those situations where you need to be prepared for anything. And because her Apex Shred applies to a wide range of enemies, she can really help you control the battlefield and dictate the pace of the fight. It's like she's taking away their advantage right from the start.
I'm starting to see why they call her the Apex Shred Queen. She's got that all-around dominance that makes her a valuable asset in a variety of situations. But we also mentioned her below-deck ability in PvP, where she weakens the enemy commander's defenses. Can you elaborate on that a bit more? How does that work in practice, and why is it so effective?
Sure. So in PvP, your often trying to board the enemy ship and take control of their systems. But their commander is there to defend those systems, and they can put up a real fight. GG's below-deck ability essentially weakens those defenses, making it easier for your boarding parties to succeed.
Ah, so it's not just about weakening ships, it's about weakening the enemy's leadership as well. It's like she's striking at the heart of their operation.
Exactly. It's a subtle but powerful effect that can really turn the tide in your favor, especially in those close PvP matches where every little advantage counts. It's like she's giving your boarding parties that extra edge they need to breach those defenses and take control.
That's brilliant. I love how these officers are designed with such intricate details and strategic considerations. It really makes you appreciate the thought and effort that went into creating them.
Absolutely. It's clear that the developers weren't just throwing darts at a board when they designed these officers. They put a lot of thought into how they would fit into the existing game mechanics and how they would impact the strategic landscape.
Okay, we've delved a bit deeper into Gigi's abilities now.
Yeah.
Let's turn our attention to the battleship buster herself, Rachel Garrett. We talked about her below-deck ability to enhance Apex Shred against battleship-type hostiles, but what exactly does that enhancement entail? Does it just make Apex Shred stronger, or is there more to it than that?
Well, it's not just about making Apex Shred stronger, it's about making it more effective against battleships. Specifically, you see, battleships are notoriously tough, and their Apex barriers are usually some of the strongest in the game. Rachel Garrett below deck ability essentially bypasses some of that toughness, making those barriers much more susceptible to Apex Shred.
So it's like she's got a key that unlocks those battleship defenses, making them vulnerable to Gigi's already powerful Apex Shred. That's a nasty combo. No wonder they call her the Battleship Buster.
It's a brilliant combination, and it really speaks to the importance of synergy in this game.
Yeah.
You can have the most powerful officers in the world, but if you don't know how to use them together effectively, you're not going to get the most out of them. It's all about understanding the interplay between their abilities and finding those combinations that can really create havoc on the battlefield.
You know, it's interesting. We were talking earlier about how the introduction of Apex Shred might lead to an increase in the use of Apex barriers. But wouldn't Rachel Garrett's ability to counter those battleship barriers make players think twice about relying too heavily on them?
That's a really good point. It creates a fascinating dilemma for players. Do you double down on Apex barriers knowing that Rachel Garrett is out there waiting to exploit them, or do you diversify your defenses knowing that Gigi is lurking around ready to shred through anything that's not on Armada ship?
It's a tough choice, and it really depends on your individual playstyle and the kind of fleet you're facing.
It's like a game of rock, paper, scissors, with each officer countering another in a complex web of strategic possibilities, and the players are caught in the middle trying to outwit each other and stay one step ahead.
Exactly, and that's what makes the game so dynamic and engaging. There's no one-size-fits-all strategy. You have to constantly adapt and evolve to stay competitive, and these Section 31 officers have just added a whole new layer to that strategic dance. I'm loving this conversation. It's so much more than just a breakdown of abilities. It's a deep dive into the strategic implications of these new officers and how they're going to change the way we play Star Trek Fleet Command. And we haven't even talked about Zeph's chaos-inducing abilities yet, but we'll save that for plan. Part 3 of our deep dive, we've already covered so much ground, and I want to make sure we have enough time to do Zeph justice.
That sounds like a plan. He deserves his own spotlight, and we'll give it to him in part 3. But for now, I think it's time to take a little break and let our listeners absorb all this information. They got a lot to think about.
Agreed. We'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll explore the unpredictable world of Zeph and his random combat states. Until then, keep those shields up, Commanders. Welcome back, Commanders. I hope you had a chance to recharge your shields and grab a Romulan ale, because we're about to dive into the wild world of Zeph, the most unpredictable of the new Section 31 officers.
I'm excited to unpack this one. He's the officer that really has the community buzzing, and for good reason. His ability to apply random combat states to enemy ships is unlike anything we've seen before in Star Trek Fleet Command. It's a total game changer.
Okay, before we get into the specifics of those random combat states, let's rewind a bit for anyone who might have missed. Part 2, we've been talking about these new Section 31 officers and how they're designed to counter the increasing prevalence of Apex barriers in the game. Gigi is the all-arounder, Rachel Garrett is the battleship buster, and Zeph, well, Zeph is the wild card.
Exactly, and that's what makes him so fascinating with Gigi and Rachel Garrett. You know, what you're getting, they have their specialties and they excel in those areas, but with Zeph, it's all about chance. He could completely cripple an enemy flagship one round, and then the next round, he might apply a combat state that's completely useless. You never know what you're going to get.
So he's the officer you bring in when you're feeling lucky, or maybe when you're up against a really tough opponent and you need to pull out all the stops.
Precisely, he's not for the faint of heart. He's for those players who like to live on the edge, who embrace the chaos, and thrive in the unpredictable. He's a high-risk, high-reward kind of officer.
You know, it's funny, we were talking earlier about how these Section 31 officers add a new layer of strategic depth to the game, but in a way, Zeph kind of throws strategy out the window, doesn't he? I mean, if you're relying on random chance, how much strategy can there really be?
That's a great observation, and it's one of the things that makes Zeph so intriguing. He forces us to rethink what it means to be strategic. In Star Trek Fleet Command, with the other officers, it's all about planning synergy and calculated risks. But with Zeph, it's almost like you're surrendering some of that control to fate. You're rolling the dice and hoping for the best.
I think that's why some players are so excited about him. He brings a whole new element of unpredictability to the game. It's like he's shaking things up, making every battle feel fresh and exciting. You never know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. I totally agree. He injects a dose of chaos into the game, which can be a lot of fun. And let's be honest, sometimes it's good to let go of that need for control and just embrace the randomness. It keeps you on your toes and forces you to adapt on the fly.
Okay, let's talk about those random combat states. The blog post mentions that he can apply a variety of effects to enemy ships, but it doesn't get into specifics. What are some of the possibilities based on what we already know about the game?
Well, he could apply the weakened state, which reduces the enemy's attack power, or maybe the exposed state, which increases the damage they take. He could even apply the disabled state, which prevents them from using their special abilities. The possibilities are endless.
Wow, that's a lot of potential chaos. Imagine you're going up against an enemy flagship, and Zeph manages to apply the disabled state right before it can unleash its ultimate ability. That would be a game changer.
Talk about a clutch moment, and that's what makes Zeph so dangerous. He has the potential to completely disrupt your opponent's plans and turn the tide of battle in an instant. Even if you don't get the most desirable combat states, the element of surprise can be a powerful weapon in itself.
So, while he might not be the most reliable officer in terms of consistent results, he's definitely the most entertaining. He's the one you bring in when you want to shake things up and see what happens.
Exactly. He's not for everyone, but for those players who like a little bit of chaos and unpredictability in their lives, Zeph is the perfect addition to their fleet.
Okay, we've talked about Zeph's bridge ability, which is all about applying random combat states to enemy ships. But what about his below-deck specialty? The blog post mentions that he's particularly good at taking down Interceptor-type enemies with apex barriers. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. Interceptor-type enemies are those fast, agile ships that can be a real pain to deal with. They zip around the battlefield, dodging your attacks and flanking your ships. And when they have apex barriers, they become even more difficult to take down. Zeph's below-deck ability enhances your ability to break through those barriers, making those pesky interceptors much easier to eliminate.
So he's like a specialized hunter, honed in on taking down those specific types of enemies.
Precisely, and that specialization can be incredibly valuable in certain situations. For example, imagine you're facing a wave of enemy ships in solo wave defense, and a bunch of those ships are interceptors with apex barriers. Having Zeph below deck can really help you control those fast-moving threats and prevent them from overwhelming your defenses.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's
Like he's filling a specific niche, providing a counter to a particular type of enemy that can be really troublesome if left unchecked.
Exactly, and that's something we've seen with all of these Section 31 officers. They each have their own unique strengths and weaknesses, and it's up to the player to figure out how to best utilize them. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's all about understanding the nuances of their abilities and adapting your strategy accordingly.
You know, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about the tactical side of things, but I think it's worth noting that these Section 31 officers also have some interesting implications for the lore of Star Trek Fleet Command. Section 31 is all about operating in the shadows, right? But with these officers, it seems like they're becoming more open about their methods. It's like they're not even trying to hide anymore.
That's a great observation, and it definitely raises some questions about the current state of the galaxy in Star Trek Fleet Command, what's happened that's made Section 31 so bold, so willing to reveal their hand. Are they becoming more desperate, or are they simply flexing their muscles, showing everyone that they're a force to be reckoned with? It's a mystery that I'm sure will be explored further in the game's storyline.
I love a good mystery. And you know what else adds to the mystery that and beyond coming in the blog post? We've speculated about new game modes, new challenges, new enemies. But what if it's something even bigger than that? What if it's something that fundamentally changes the way we play Star Trek Fleet Command?
Ooh, now you're talking. What if it's a whole new faction, a new storyline, maybe even a new region of space to explore? The possibilities are endless.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. The future of Star Trek Fleet Command is looking brighter than ever, and these Section 31 officers are leading the charge into this uncharted territory. I can't wait to see what adventures await us.
Me neither, and that's the beauty of this game. It's constantly evolving, always surprising us with new content and new challenges. It's a journey that never ends, and we're all along for the ride.
Well said. All right, Commanders. We've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Section 31 officers. We've explored their unique abilities, their strategic implications, and even their potential impact on the future of the game. But now, it's your turn to take the helm.
Get out there, experiment with these new officers, and discover the secrets they hold. The galaxy is waiting.
And don't forget to share your experiences with us. We want to hear your thoughts, strategies, and triumphs. Let us know what you think of these new officers and how they've changed your game.
We're all in this together, Commanders. Let's explore the final frontier, one Apex shred at a time.
Be sure to follow Dr. Iron Chef on Twitch and subscribe to Aloha Dis on YouTube.
Mahalo for joining us.